Having looked at quantitative data collection management, this slide series is going to examine the ways of dealing with qualitative data, so how it can be coded and the different traditions of doing so. As with all data analysis and interpretation, coding is required to bring order and understanding to the information collected. There is no single best way of doing this in qualitative research. There are actually a number of different traditions that have been adopted. The two main competing ones are content analysis and discourse analysis, and we're going to cover each one of these in turn. The process that is used depends on any number of things, and that is around the questions that you want to answer, the needs of the people that are actually going to be using the information, the resources and skills available, and the audience that is actually going to use the research. And of course, this is not by any means an exhaustive list. Content analysis, we're going to start with content analysis, and this is an approach to the analysis of documents and text that tries to quantify their content by using categories that we apply in a systematic way. So, for example, if we were going to look at the interest shown by the mass media in homelessness, the questions that we would be looking at are around the proportion of the news that is devoted to reporting homelessness, the frequency of the news media reporting by different media types, and so on. So it's a sort of quantitative look at the issues of homelessness that are reported in the media. The second approach is discourse analysis, and that is about looking at things differently. So that's about examining language, focusing on any aspect of linguistic behaviour. So if we were going to take exactly the same example of the interest shown by the mass media in homelessness, with a discourse analysis we'd approach it differently. The questions would be about how were the homeless people represented, who was included in the stories, how were images and words used in the portrayal of people reported as homeless. This would be a more qualitative look at the issues of homelessness reported in the media. Now, discourse analysis, there is a sort of spectrum of discourse analysis, and we move from semiotics to narrative analysis. Now, semiotics are the study of signs, physical things that carry meaning, identifying relationships with and between signs. So if we have a look at, say for example, the studying of advertising images, it would be about how the images of men and women take on a deeper meaning than what is just on the surface. Deconstruction, as a form of discourse analysis, is about the identification of tensions within text over the meaning of key terms. Narrative analysis is about examining time and change within text. We also have critical discourse analysis, and this focuses particularly on the relationship between power and discourse. So this sort of branch of discourse analysis really aims to challenge social orders and practices that are readily accepted, but actually only really represent one particular way of looking at the world. It's just that this particular way of looking at the world has become accepted as the only way. Along with discourse analysis, conversational analysis is another way of examining and analysing language. Conversation analysis is the sort of detailed analysis and recording, a detailed analysis of recorded and transcribed naturally occurring talk between at least two people. What it does is it aims to uncover the underlying structures of what is being said. So we're looking at things like the length of pauses, the tone of voices, the interruptions, those kind of things. It's based on very, very small units of conversation rather than large amounts of material. So it's a very sort of small, detailed, in-depth look at a particular conversation. Now, content and discourse analysis, the two main ways of thinking about looking at qualitative information, they are at two ends of the spectrum. Both have their strengths and weaknesses. Content analysis can identify content in terms of belonging to one particular category or not. So whether when you're looking through all the different media articles, going back to the example of homelessness, whether a story represents a story on homelessness or not. You then use this categorization to then count, and you can then sort of quantify patterns within the data, but there's of course always a question about whether quantifying research is actually sort of an essential part to identifying patterns in data. Do we have to do it this way? Now, doing content analysis, we are picking back up with the issue of coding. So we're going back to our quantitative way of looking at things as we were looking at things in the last slide series. So doing content analysis, we have to have a coding framework. Okay, so we apply codes or tags to chunks of text that enable us to examine those particular chunks of text for links, for similarities or for difference. The types of coding that we use a number of different types of coding. We can use manifest coding, which is where we identify where there are recurring terms occurring. Latent coding is about unpicking the themes or terms that are occurring beneath the surface. In vivo is about looking at the terms in the language that's being used of those who are being interviewed or observed. Sociological coding is about the themes that we can draw from the language of the researcher's theoretical background, so we may be able to put some themes into what we're seeing. Deductive coding is about producing lists of categories prior to collecting the data. So we develop our list of what it is that we want to collect before we go about collecting it, and we apply that list to the information that we're looking at. Inductive coding is the opposite. So having reviewed the initial material we've collected, we then develop our codes and then go back and code. We have what's called summary coding, and those are first level codes, and those are things that we basically focus on very general characteristics, basic characteristics about the person that you're interviewing and so on and so forth. And then we have pattern coding, so those are things that actually highlight patterns within the data. We also deal with what we call axial codes, and those are codes that highlight what the researcher perceive are the core issues or themes. We also have systematic coding, and that's the process of identifying all the emerging themes that can actually be found as we're either listening back to our interviews or reading articles or so on and so forth. Individual or group codings, there where each research member actually initially reads the data and they develop themes and they discuss those with their other research members, and then they develop a final set of themes for which they're going to look at the data with. Now, using secondary data, we talked about using secondary data in quantitative data collection. There is also a role for using secondary data in qualitative data collection, and the reasons for using secondary qualitative data are exactly the same as those for quantitative data analysis. Of course, it depends on the nature of the research and what value it may add, but sometimes it can be a real bonus to be able to look at existing data and existing information. Some of the difficulties in using existing reusing qualitative data lie really around ethics. So it's reusing data that was promised as being confidential the first time round. Ethics in terms of revealing identities, and of course when conducting research yourself, you understand the social context in which the research was conducted. If you're reviewing somebody else's qualitative research, you're unlikely to have that same level of understanding of the social context of that research, why it was conducted, how it was being conducted, and what was going on at the time. However, secondary data analysis of qualitative data does offer real opportunities. You can get hold of secondary qualitative data from the Qualitative website of the Economic and Social Data Service, the ESDS, and they provide access and support for a real wide range of social science qualitative data sets.